Kathwat lap in shnuknukwat, in chash kluch, shamasquachicha Georgina, Lil'wat Nation, Sht'atleomothcan, ama atskin China. So what I just said, loosely translated into English from the Lil'wat language, is, hello everyone, my traditional name is Kluch. English translation is sweet, but you all can call me Georgina. I'm from the Lil'wat Nation, that's within the Sht'atleomoth territory, and it's so nice to see you all here today. My introduction is quite short compared to what I've been raised hearing and what I've been taught to do. I've always been understanding of how to introduce myself, potential children, potential spouses, siblings, parents, parents' siblings, grandparents, great-grandparents. That's how you would get to know me, where I come from, what I'm good at, and the traits that my family carry. Today we get to know somebody by saying our name, where we're from, and where we work. I learned a lot of my culture growing up, and a lot of it came from my community and from my school. I went to a school that was completely opposite of residential school. I was able to see my family, and some of my family members are my teachers. I was able to speak my language. We had Shakota every week, which was to dance. Some of the greatest things I've learned was over a cup of tea, with my friends, with my family, with my coworkers here at the Squamish Cultural Center. Some of the greatest things I've learned was over a cup of tea. I've been working at the SLCC for 7 years now. I started in 2016. You'll see me cultural sharing at many different capacities, whether it's giving tours on the floor, welcoming people in to the cultural center here, into Whistler, into Huitema, giving cultural presentations just like this. Cultural sharing can often bring conversations afterwards. And so after I've answered all the questions about how my people would live, what they would wear, what they would eat, there's often questions of truth and reconciliation, if I know what that looks like. If I know what it means to be an ally. I really don't know what that looks like. I don't know what the answer is. We've really only been talking about truth and reconciliation since 2015. I learned a lot of my language and a lot of my culture by witnessing others living the way Lil'wat people would live, the best they can. Teaching what they can, teaching all they know, and learning as much as we can. There's always asks about revitalization and why it's so important. Because it's the way my people have been living since time out of mind, since time immemorial. I learned a lot of my culture in what people often say is a modern way. I learned my language and my culture and my songs and my dances while going to school. I learned my language as a second language, reading, writing, translating. I know how to do all that very well. Having a conversation with somebody else is quite hard for me. For the Lil'wat people, for the Sht'atleom people, where the Lil'wat people are a part of, in 2001, we just had under 3% of our people who could fluently speak our language. In 2018, that had gone down to 1.4%. But that's not because we're not making the effort. It's because the semi-speakers have grown up to 11.4%. Semi-speakers are the ones who are learning their language, who don't consider themselves fluent quite yet. I consider myself a semi-speaker because I speak as much as I can. There's been many injustices here in Canada, residential schools being one of them that had affected me. It had gone on from 1831 all the way up until 1996. The last residential school that closed down before I was even born. But the effects of residential school still affect me. I didn't go to residential school, my parents didn't go to residential school, but my grandparents did. My grandmother, she went into residential school at the age of 7. She wasn't allowed to speak her language. She wasn't allowed to see her family. She wasn't allowed to be with what she was familiar with. During these injustices, we weren't allowed to be children. We weren't allowed to be parents. We weren't allowed to be who we were familiar with, who we were taught to be. We had to put it away to protect the ones we loved. And when I say we, it's not me, it's the family that's behind me, the people that fill in these seats. When I introduce myself, it's not just so you know who I am. It's to help the ones that are filling those empty seats support me when I'm speaking. It's quite natural as an Indigenous person, as a First Nations, as Lil'wat, as Stratlium, to always think of the ones that are coming after us when we're making decisions. So we do our absolute best to take on what we love and make it easier for the ones that are coming. That's what it means to be an ancestor. That's what it means to me. I've been learning my language for about 4 or 5 years now, and we do 1 class per term, and it's usually night classes. And I have a classmate who's quite close with us, and she sat next to us all the time, and she would sometimes even bring us home after class. When we first started our language journey, she admitted that she didn't really speak her language, and she didn't really feel comfortable to. And she didn't really understand it. And she would go on and on sometimes, and it sounded hurtful. I just let her talk and never ask questions. But I remember during one evening, we were having fun and we were telling stories, short stories and sentences to each other, and we're having fun and enjoying the night because we could understand each other. Enjoying our language because we could understand each other. Short stories like, my dog came home and went to sleep. And we'd laugh and enjoy it because we understood it. And my classmate next to me, she had become quite quiet and she was quite emotional. And I asked her if she was okay, and she began to mumble a few things. And I didn't understand her or hear anything that she said. So I gave her some time and she began to mumble again. And then she said I could remember. I understand. All of a sudden I know how to speak our language. After having to put it away for so long and not feeling safe, tucking it away, and then being in a safe place where we are all happy, where we felt okay to learn, it came back to her. It felt like she could bring back and celebrate it more loudly and be more herself. I often think about her, and I see her quite often. Whenever I talk to her about this memory, it doesn't seem like much to her, but it's something that I carry quite deeply. I've been working at the SLCC, and I give tours, performances, traditional welcomings. I don't like to say traditional because it seems like it's in the past tense. Welcoming to our unceded territories, to the Squamish and Lil'wat, getting to know ourselves, having so much pride, taking on this knowledge that we've been given permission to share with everybody that comes into these doors, taking on all the questions about who we are and about our own experiences. But again, after answering all the questions, there's the discussion that comes up about allyship and how to be an ally. How do we involve more Indigenous people into the workforce? How do we indigenize the Whistler community? How do we incorporate more Lil'wat? How do we incorporate more Squamish? How do we talk to them? And I still don't know how to answer these questions after working and doing this job for so long. But that doesn't mean I won't continue to have these conversations. I don't know what truth and reconciliation looks like. And I really don't think it's going to happen within my lifetime. It's not black and white. It's not all of a sudden a day we're living by truth and reconciliation. Whenever I'm talking to someone, when I'm getting introduced, that's the first question I get asked. What does truth and reconciliation look like to you? And all I could say is to listen and learn, because that's what I was taught. I've learned the most from the people that are around me. There was a man who came in to visit the SLCC, and he visited all the staff, all of my coworkers that we are here. And all he wanted to know was who they were, what their name was, who their family was, and what they loved to do. And I like to say family, the staff here, the family here, we're all quite close, and I'm pretty sure I could say that I'm related to all the staff here. And in the back room, or when we were passing each other, we always acknowledged that he didn't even introduce himself. He just wanted to know who we were and what we were doing. And he spent the entire day here. And at the end of the day, when I was helping closing, there was a temporary exhibit for Truth and Reconciliation at the end of September, which involves Truth and Reconciliation, the 60s scoop, residential school, and the burials that were rediscovered. And I found him frozen, standing at the signage. And I asked him if he was okay, and he tried to hold his emotions back, and he asked me where I was from, and what I liked to do, and what my family name was. Once I told him, he asked me about a last name, and I told him that it was quite strong within one of the St'át'imc communities that the Lil'wat Nation comes from. And he continued to hold himself, and he said that's all he wanted, was to find family. Because he knew that there was Nation members here. So he talked to every single person to understand their story before he told his. He's from the 60s scoop. He was affected by the 60s scoop. In the 60s, there was children that was taken out of their homes and put into foster care, quite far away, again, where they weren't familiar. And this man, he didn't have a right to a status card because he didn't have his birth certificate due to the 60s scoop. People call it the 60s scoop because they think it only happened in the 60s, but it's still happening today. I hope you go home today and look up the millennial scoop. There's still a lot of Indigenous peoples in foster care homes. So when I'm learning my language, when I'm learning my culture, when I'm learning about the land, I'm learning about myself. Uqamiuqsh means language of the land. We come from the land. We have a lot of conversations, a lot of stories. That's really where I take a lot of my learning from. Connecting with one another. Taking the time to understand who you are and where you're coming from. So today, I hope you join me in this conversation, even though I don't know the answers, even though I'm still quite young on my journey. There's a lot of barriers to some of the answers, and sometimes I can't get back to you through email by Monday, because sometimes it's just not available, and we're still learning. So I hope you join me someday in this conversation of listening and learning over a cup of tea. Thank you, everyone.